The evening in Cleveland, Ohio was chilly, with a sharp wind sweeping fallen leaves along the sidewalks. At the corner of a bustling street, where neon signs of coffee shops and stores flickered, Michael stood holding a paper cup of coffee. He had just finished a meeting with a local youth organization, discussing support programs for kids from low-income families. His schedule was packed, but Michael always made time for such events. They reminded him of where he came from and why he kept pushing for change. Wrapped in a dark coat, his face partially hidden by a hood, he blended into the city's hum. Car horns, snippets of passers-by's conversations, the distant bark of a dog. The scent of roasted chestnuts from a street cart mingled with the sharp smell of wet asphalt after a recent rain. Michael took a sip of his coffee, feeling warmth spread through his chest, and was about to head to his car when he heard a shout. "Hey you, where you rushing off to?" A rough voice cut through the air. Michael stopped and turned. A few meters away, near the entrance to a small grocery store, two white men in denim jackets and caps loomed over a young black man who looked no older than 20. The young man, dressed in a worn jacket and jeans, clutched a plastic bag of groceries. His shoulders were tense, his gaze fixed downward, but his eyes held a mix of fear and anger. "I didn't do anything," he said quietly, trying to step back. One of the men, stocky with a red beard, shoved him in the shoulder. "Didn't do anything? Then why do you look like you stole something?" He nodded at the bag. "Come on, show us what's in there." The other, lanky with a tattoo on his neck, laughed loudly. "Yeah, let's check. Maybe we'll call the cops, let them sort it out." Michael felt anger rising in his chest. He'd seen this before, too many times. In his hometown of Newark, scenes like this were part of daily life. Prejudice, baseless accusations, humiliation. But here, in the heart of a modern city in 2025, it felt even more absurd. He took a step forward but paused, recalling his mentor's words. "Anger destroys, understanding builds." Michael took a deep breath and assessed the situation. The young man was scared but holding his ground. Passers-by walked on, averting their eyes. No one intervened. "Excuse me." Michael's voice was calm but firm, like steel. He approached, hands in his pockets to appear non-threatening. "Is there a problem?" The red-bearded man turned, his eyes narrowing. "And what's it to you? This ain't your business." Michael pulled back his hood, letting the street light illuminate his face. He knew he might be recognized, an actor, an activist, a name often in the news. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was the young man standing before him, and the two men who thought they could humiliate someone without consequence. "It looks like you're accusing him of something," Michael said, nodding toward the young man. "Got any proof? Or just a hunch?" The lanky one snorted, but a flicker of uncertainty crossed his eyes. "Listen, man, we're just messing around. Don't get involved." "Messing around?" Michael raised an eyebrow, his voice steady. "You're pushing someone, demanding to see their stuff, and threatening to call the police. That's not a joke. That's intimidation." The young man, later introduced as Devin, looked up. A spark of hope flashed in his eyes, but he stayed silent, gripping his bag tightly. Michael sensed the tension in the air rising. Passers-by began to stop, forming a small crowd. Someone pulled out a phone, clearly recording the scene. The red-bearded man stepped toward Michael, his face flushing. "Who are you to tell us what to do? You know where you are. This is our city." "Your city." Michael smiled, but there was no warmth in his eyes. "This city belongs to everyone who lives here, and I don't see this guy doing anything to justify your behavior." "He looked suspicious," the lanky one muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Suspicious," Michael echoed. "Because he's black, and walking out of a store with groceries? Tell me, how often do you get stopped on the street and asked to show what's in your bag? Silence fell. The red-bearded man opened his mouth, but found no words. Michael turned to Devin. "What's your name?" "Devin," he replied softly. "Devin, you okay?" Michael looked into his eyes, trying to convey reassurance. Devin nodded, though his hands still trembled. "Yeah, I just wanted to get home." "All right," Michael said. "If you want, I can walk you to your car or the bus stop. Make sure no one else bothers you." The red-bearded man laughed, but it was a nervous sound. "Come on, man, we were just joking. No need to make a big deal." "An apology would be more appropriate than excuses," Michael cut in sharply. He didn't raise his voice, but each word landed like a blow. The crowd murmured. An elderly woman, clutching a grocery bag, called out loudly, "That's right, leave the kid alone. You should be ashamed." The lanky one stepped back, muttering under his breath. The red-bearded man glanced at Michael, then at Devin, and grumbled, "Sorry, man. We went too far." Devin just nodded, avoiding his gaze. Michael placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let's go." They walked away from the store, leaving the two men under the crowd's watchful eyes. Michael felt the adrenaline slowly fade, but the anger still burned inside. He knew this wasn't the end. Scenes like this would happen again, until people changed their mindsets. At the bus stop, Devin paused. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "I thought no one would step in." Michael shook his head. "Don't thank me. This shouldn't be a big deal. People should respect each other. Always." Devin gave a faint smile. "You. I know you. You're that actor, right?" Michael sighed but smiled back. "Tonight, I'm just a guy drinking coffee who doesn't like injustice." The bus pulled up, and Devin boarded, casting a grateful glance at Michael. Michael stood at the stop, watching the bus disappear around the corner. He knew this encounter was just a drop in the ocean, but every drop mattered. He pulled out his phone and dialed his friend, an activist and organizer of local gatherings. "Kevin, we need to talk. I want to set up a community meeting about how we can teach people to handle situations like this. Not with anger, but with dialogue." On the other end, Kevin laughed. "You never stop, do you?" "Can't," Michael replied, looking at the city twinkling with lights. "And I won't." He felt this was just the beginning. The two men at the store might rethink their actions, or they might not. But Devin, the crowd that gathered, and even the elderly woman who spoke up, they all saw that things could be different. And that was the first step. Michael sat in the small office of a community organization housed in an old brick building in downtown Cleveland. The room smelled of freshly brewed coffee and old books. Posters about equality and justice adorned the walls, and the city's hum, car horns and distant construction noise, filtered through the thick windows. A notebook with scribbled ideas lay on the table before him, while Kevin, his longtime friend and local initiative organizer, scrolled through his phone nearby. Seriously, Kevin raised an eyebrow, looking up from his screen. "You want to hold a meeting this week? After what happened yesterday?" Michael nodded, tapping his pen on the notebook. "Exactly because of it. People need to know how to respond when they see injustice, not just stand by or record it on their phones. We can teach them to act calmly but confidently." Kevin sighed, but a spark of curiosity lit his eyes. "All right, but it won't be easy. You know how it is here. Some are scared to get involved, others think calling the cops is enough, and some don't even see a problem." "I know," Michael replied, his voice quiet but resolute. "But if we don't start, nothing changes. I don't want this to be just a lecture. I want people to talk, share their experiences, to feel their voice matters. Kevin smiled, setting his phone down. You've always been an idealist. Okay, I'll talk to our volunteers, but you'll have to speak. People will show up if they know you're there. Michael grimaced. He didn't like using his fame as a tool, but he knew it could draw a crowd. Deal, but I want this to be about everyone, not me. A few days later, the community center's hall was packed. The old room, with its wooden beams and worn carpets, buzzed with conversation. The scent of freshly baked cookies, laid out by volunteers, mingled with coffee. The crowd was diverse. Elderly couples whispering to each other, young activists in bright slogan t-shirts, a few families with kids. Michael stood by the stage, holding a microphone, feeling a slight thrill. He was used to cameras and big venues, but this felt different, more real. Good evening, he began, and the room quieted. I'm glad to see you all. We're here to talk about what's happening on our streets, about how we react when we see injustice, and about how we can make our city better. He recounted the incident at the store, avoiding details about his fame. He described how two men harassed Devin, how the crowd stayed silent, and how he had to choose, walk away or step in. The room listened intently, with only occasional whispers or creaking chairs. I'm not saying you should jump into a fight or yell, Michael continued, but we can learn to speak up, ask questions, show we see what's happening and that it's wrong. Sometimes one calm voice is enough to change everything. After his speech, Kevin invited everyone to share their stories. The first to raise her hand was an elderly woman with gray hair, dressed in a neat cardigan. Her name was Esther, and she was the same woman who had spoken up at the store. I saw what happened, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. And I was scared, not for myself, but for that young man. I thought, what if that was my grandson? But when you spoke, she nodded at Michael, I felt I had to say something. And I don't regret it. The room erupted in applause. Esther smiled, but tears glistened in her eyes. Then a middle-aged man, Tom, who introduced himself as the owner of a local auto shop, took the floor. I'm white, he began a bit awkwardly, and I never thought I could be part of the problem. But last week, I saw my employee, a black guy, stopped by cops just for walking home after his shift. I didn't say anything, and now I'm ashamed. His words stirred the room. Some nodded, others frowned, but all listened. Michael felt the atmosphere shift. People were opening up, sharing pain, fears, and hopes. After the meeting, Michael stayed to talk with attendees. Devin, whom Kevin had invited, approached him. He looked calmer than that night at the store, but his eyes still held a trace of wariness. I didn't know you'd get all these people together, he said, hands in his pockets. It's cool. Michael smiled. It's not me. It's us. You're here too, and that's something. Devin shrugged, but a faint smile tugged at his lips. You know, I kept thinking if you hadn't stepped in, it could have been worse. Maybe they'd have called the cops. Or something else. Michael placed a hand on his shoulder. But it didn't happen, and now we can make sure it doesn't happen to others. They talked a bit more, and Devin promised to attend the next meeting. As he left, Esther approached. Her eyes shone despite her fatigue. I've lived in this city my whole life, she said, and I've seen things change, for better and for worse. But tonight, I felt we can do more. Thank you. Michael shook his head. Thank you, Esther. You inspire. That evening, back at his hotel, Michael stood by the window, looking at Cleveland's lights. He thought of Esther, who found the courage to speak, of Tom, who admitted his mistake, of Devin, who might have felt his voice mattered for the first time, and of the two men at the store. Had they reflected on what happened? He knew one meeting wouldn't change everything. Prejudice, fear, and injustice don't vanish overnight. But tonight, in that hall, people listened to each other. They spoke. They began to see each other not as strangers, but as neighbors, as part of one city. Michael pulled out his phone and texted Kevin, "Prep the next meeting. We're just getting started." He went to bed feeling that this evening wasn't just an event, but the start of something bigger. Maybe it was a small step, but every step brings change. And in that there was hope. 3 months had passed since that first meeting in the community center. Winter had fully settled in Cleveland. Streets were dusted with snow, and evenings grew long and cold. But inside the old brick building housing Kevin's organization, the atmosphere was warm. The hall was packed again, this time with even more people. The wooden beams overhead were adorned with garlands, and tables held thermoses of hot chocolate and plates of homemade cookies. The scent of cinnamon and vanilla mingled with the buzz of conversations, laughter, and the soft hum of a heater in the corner. Michael stood by the stage, watching the crowd. He spotted familiar faces. Esther, now an unofficial leader of a discussion group for seniors, sat in the front row, chatting animatedly with a young girl in a bright beanie. Tom, the auto shop owner, stood by the drink table, pouring hot chocolate and laughing at a volunteer's joke. And in the corner, a bit shyly, stood Devin, holding a folder of notes. Over these months, he'd become an active member of the initiative, helping organize nonviolent communication workshops for youth. Tonight's meeting was special, with support from local activists and a few business owners who joined after the first event. Michael and Kevin had launched the Voices of the Community program. It included regular workshops teaching people how to respond to prejudice and injustice in daily life, from street conflicts to workplace or school situations. The program also featured forums where residents could share their stories and ideas for improving the city. Tonight marked the end of the first workshop cycle, and the hall buzzed with anticipation. Michael stepped onto the stage, holding a microphone. His coat hung on a chair, and a high-neck sweater gave him a relaxed look. He smiled, feeling the room's warmth fill him. "Good evening, Cleveland," he began, and the room responded with applause. 3 months ago, we gathered here to talk about making our city fairer. We talked about fear, prejudice, and how sometimes a single word can change everything. And today I stand before you to say we did it. Not because Kevin or I are special, but because you showed up. You spoke. You listened. You acted. He paused, scanning the room. But this isn't the end. It's just the beginning. Esther took the stage next. Her gray hair was neatly pinned up, and her voice was steady despite a slight tremble. "I've lived in this city for 67 years, she said, holding a sheet of notes. "I've seen people divided into us and them. But these past 3 months, I've seen something else. I've seen neighbors who never spoke sit at the same table. I've seen young and old find common ground. And I've seen my own fears fade when I start to speak." She shared how, just last week, she defused a conflict at a supermarket when a cashier rudely accused a young man of looking suspicious. Esther calmly intervened, asking the cashier if there was a real reason for the accusation. Her words, spoken without anger but with dignity, prompted an apology. The room erupted in applause, and Esther, smiling, added, "I learned this here, and I want all of us to keep learning." Then Devin spoke. He nervously adjusted his shirt collar, but his voice was firm. "I'm the guy this all started with," he said, and the room fell silent. That night at the store, I thought I'd be alone, but someone stopped. Someone spoke, and that changed everything. He explained how the workshops helped him overcome fear and helplessness, how he began working with local youth, teaching them to respond to prejudice without aggression. "I'm not saying everything's perfect now," he added, "but I know we can change this city, one conversation at a time." When Devin finished, the room rose in a standing ovation. Michael felt a lump in his throat. He saw people wiping tears, hugging, laughing. This wasn't just an evening. It was a moment when the city felt united. After the formal part, people lingered to chat. Michael stood by the drink table when a man approached, one he didn't immediately recognize. It was the lanky man with the neck tattoo from that night at the store. His name was Ryan, and he looked different. No cap, hair neatly combed, wearing a shirt instead of a denim jacket. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. Michael nodded, stepping to a quieter corner. I was there," Ryan began, eyes downcast. "And I know me and Dan went too far. I'm not proud of it." Michael stayed silent, letting him continue. "After that night, I thought a lot," Ryan said. "My brother showed me a video from your first meeting. And I went to one of your groups. Anonymously. I wasn't going to say anything, just listened. And I realized I was part of the problem." He looked up, and there was something new in his eyes. Not defiance, not anger, but sincerity. "I'm not promising I'll be perfect," he added. "But I want to try. I talked to Dan, and he's thinking about it too. We both want to come to the next workshop." Michael felt the tension in his chest ease. He extended his hand. "That's the first step, Ryan. And I'm glad you took it." Ryan shook his hand, relief flashing in his eyes. He walked away, and Michael stood watching him go. This was a moment he hadn't expected, but it changed everything. That night, back at his hotel, Michael stood by the window, looking at the snow-dusted city. Cleveland's lights twinkled like stars, and somewhere out there, in homes and apartments, people carried on. Esther, perhaps, was telling her grandkids about tonight. Devin, likely, was jotting down new workshop ideas. And Ryan and Dan, maybe, were starting to rethink who they wanted to be. Michael knew there was still much work ahead. Prejudice doesn't vanish in a season, and injustice doesn't retreat without a fight. But tonight, he saw change was possible. Not loud, not instant, but slow, deep, real. Every conversation, every small step, brought the city closer to what it could be, a place where people see, hear, and respect each other. He pulled out his phone and texted Kevin. "Prep the next cycle. We're not stopping." And as he went to bed, he felt this evening wasn't just an end, but the start of something bigger. The door was open, and beyond it lay hope.